Hi, friends. The one thing about the Lisanne, Froon, and Kris Kremers case that bothers me is that eyewitness testimonies are discounted. They're kind of swept under the rug. And, that's not how history is done, how proper historical research. And let me try to give you an example. Something about, most of history is that we know is from historical testimony or historical claims. We can't scientifically prove 99.9% of human history. It's claims, it's testimony. That's how we come about most of what we know. Not everything, but most of it. Now, let's take something like the Battle of the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo is something that I've been interested in for many years. I've read probably about 150 books or articles on the case. Now, for a long time, the Battle of the Alamo, the Mexican casualties at the Battle of the Alamo, there was said to be 1,600 men. But then, there's revisionist historians that came on the scene, and there was about 183 Texans inside the Alamo. Some were Mexicans too inside the Alamo, actually, but we'll call them Alamo defenders. About 183 to 188. And people were like, how could 188 men kill 1,600 Mexican soldiers? How can that happen? That doesn't sound right. So we better reduce the Mexican soldier casualties to make it seem more believable, to make it seem more credited. But is that the right thing to do? How many Mexican soldiers were killed at the Battle of the Alamo? Now, can we scientifically prove something? No, we can't scientifically prove how many Mexican soldiers died, but this is how history should be done. There was a soldier, Jose Enrique de la Peña. He was a Mexican soldier, and in his journal, he wrote that the Mexican casualties, I think off the top of my head, they range from about 150 to 200. That's what he said they were. And all these people that started to write books on the Battle of the Alamo, they quoted him. Now, this is the problem with Jose Enrique de la Peña. This is an issue that we have with him. Is in his journal, well, first of all, in his journal, he had papers that didn't all match. They were all different lengths of papers, and you might think, well, if you're on a march, that's common. Well, there's handwriting experts that some claim that it's disputed whether it's the same handwriter who wrote all the journal entries. Was that's a big thing. But then, this is also a big thing, is things that are common along the march from Mexico to San Antonio, where the Alamo is. Well, he got some of the locations mixed up. Now, if you're on a I talked to World War II vets, and they could tell me where certain locations were along, from France into Germany. They knew because they traveled that. Well, these Mexican soldiers were on foot, they were walking, and they didn't breeze through South Texas. They walked slowly. So I I find it's doubtful to me that they would get mixed up with the geographic places where towns and places like that were. So there's a lot of doubt on this journal being a fraud, but a lot of historians kind of stick to it. But let's look at it. So we have one Mexican journal that says that about 150 to 250 Mexican soldiers died at the Battle of the Alamo. Well, then where do we get the 1,600 number? Where do we get 1,600 casualties? Susanna Dickerson, one of the surviving Americans inside the Battle of the Alamo, she claimed that the Alamo defenders killed 1,600 casualties. Now, she didn't go by and count one by one. That was just a rough estimate that she had. Okay, so it doesn't seem, but there's a big difference between 1,600 and 150. So Susanna Dickerson and Jose Enrique de la Pena, who's more believable? Well, we know Susanna Dickerson was a person, and we can place her inside of the Alamo, something that we're not really sure we can do with Jose Enrique de la Pena's journal. So then we have also, we have the mayor of San Antonio, and he said that the Alamo defenders killed 1,600 Mexican soldiers during the siege of the Alamo. Well, he's a mayor. What would he know? Well, he was the person in charge of burying the Mexican dead. So if anyone knows, wouldn't he know? Wouldn't the person that buried the Mexican dead know the right casualty numbers? So you have a person inside the Battle of the Alamo, Susanna Dickerson, who says that the casualty list was 1,600. You have someone else who came to the same conclusion, but they didn't intermingle. He came to the conclusion, and they were across the lines, and he came to the conclusion based on burying the dead. So, what about all the other Mexican officers and soldiers? We have Jose Enrique de la Peña, which there's a big question mark to know whether it's accurate. But would you know that there's probably about 10 different Mexican officers that had their casualty count journalized, listed? And would you know that those range all the way from 6,000 Mexican casualties all the way to like 100 Mexican casualties? So like if you did an average, the average would be around 1,600. So we have the Alamo defender survivor Susanna Dickerson, 1,600. The person who buried the Mexican dead says 1,600. And the average number of casualties that the officers that we have recorded, their average comes to about 1,600. And my final piece of the puzzle is Santa Anna himself. Now, Santa Anna, after the battle, immediately after the battle, for political purposes, he said, "Oh, we just lost like 150 soldiers," because he wanted to keep support at Mexico high in favor of this war to keep Texas. However, decades later in his memoirs, when he had no reason to lie, he was writing this in his memoirs before he died, he said that he lost between 1,000 and 1,600 people at the Battle of Alamo. He said he lost over 1,000. That's what he said, over 1,000. So we have Santa Anna himself. We have source inside the Alamo. We have the person that buried the dead. We have the average number that the Mexican officers that we have recorded say. And we're going to say that just Jose Enrique de la Peña and his big question mark journal outdoes those other sources? No way. It doesn't. Wikipedia has this wrong, and I just showed why. So, taking this to Lisanne, Froon, and Kris Kremers, I'll probably be the only video that connects the Battle of the Alamo to Lisanne, Froon, and Kris Kremers. But there's a reason for this. There was a German tourist on April, I believe it was April 5th, might have been April 4th, April 5th, it was Marcus M., a journal tourist, is April 6th, I believe, might have been the 5th. He reported that he was in the wilderness. Now, it wasn't the Pianista Trail. It was a different trail. It was the Trail of Quetels. I'm sorry I butchered that. But on that trail that's close to the Pianista Trail, he said that he heard female screams, and then he heard a crash, and then he saw men running away. A German tourist said that. That's his testimony. Then he went back, he told local authorities, and they combed the area, and they didn't find anything. But why, this Marcus, this German tourist, why would we not believe him? And then we had the French tourist. Now the French tourists, these two women, they didn't find, they didn't hear anything. What they have is hearsay, but they claim that local people told them that there were screams in the forest, and it was dangerous. Don't go in there. Now, you can look at these French tours, you can find their own information, but they mention the Dutch women in there, and they don't say that these screaming women were the Dutch women, but isn't it strange, while the Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers were out, during that same period of time, these French tourists say that they came across locals that warned them about going on a trail by themselves because there were screams. Okay, so you have a German tourist, you have the two French that say that this is kind of like the rumors in the town, and then from the attorney of the family of the Froons and the Kremers, their attorney, he said that on the afternoon of April 1st, there was a witness, and I think it was the restaurant owner, but do I have it listed here? Jose Morales. Jose Morales, I think he's the restaurant owner. Jose Morales, he saw Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon on April 1st as they were coming back from the Pianista Trail. And he said that they were hungry and they were tired. Friends, my first theory video said that they did not die in that forest. They were not lost for days in the forest. I said that they came back, and I said there was witness testimony that they came back. And then, I kind of reformed my theory because someone said, well, their cell phones never picked up. Well, you know what? I think this is possible. What happened is that the women did make it back on April 1st. I tend to believe Jose Morales. They came back. Don't we have the eyewitness testimony, and the testimonies, they seem to collaborate here. That something array happened. I believe April 1st they came back, and then you remember that picture in the water? I believe that was Lisanne, Froon, and Kris Kremers. I believe they were abducted after they came back from the Pianista Trail. They went for a swim when they came back. You know the picture I'm talking about if you know this case. That's why they never turned their cell phone back on. So I believe they were abducted, and then later they were killed and they were left on in the wilderness on the trail. So let's not sweep the eyewitness testimony under the rug. Why would we not believe the German tourists? Why would we not believe those who told the French tourists? Why would we not believe Jose Morales? And there's more. Okay, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So, friends, my gut feeling, I'm coming back to my gut feeling that these women, they came back on that trail on April 1st. I really just, I can see why they wouldn't have, but so I'm not going to say I can't see why they didn't. But when you just do the laws of probability, and they came back. Why would Jose Morales lie? Why would he lie? We have no hardcore evidence that they were on the trail on April 2nd, April 3rd, April 4th. Do we? No. So, anyway, friends, we live in an age where we want DNA, we want forensic evidence, but don't forget that most of history that we know is because of eyewitness. We know that Caesar crossed the Rubicon because of eyewitness testimony. We know that George Washington crossed the Delaware because of eyewitness testimony, not scientific proving things. This is eyewitness. We know that there's about 1,000 to 1,600 men who died in the Battle of the Alamo, Siege of the Alamo, because of eyewitness testimony. And, so anyway, thank you, friends. Take care.